But I do believe in my heart that regardless of what happens to us, what we're exposed to, we do have a choice to choose to live your life to the fullest extent possible. And not to say that that's easy, and not to say you don't have to do some hard work.
Hello, dear listeners. It's that time again when we stroll through the paths of ambition, desire, and success. Welcome to the Dare to Declare podcast, where we explore the enchanting world of giant manifestors who've turned their visions and goals into the stuff of legends. I couldn't help but wonder, how do some people create the lives they've always dreamed of? Is it the magic of manifesting, the power of perseverance, or perhaps just a dash of serendipity? Well, dear friends, grab your coffee cups because we're about to spill the tea on fascinating journeys of those who dare to dream big and make it happen. Join me as we sip on success stories and ponder the ever-enticing question, can we all manifest our dreams into reality, or is it just an urban fairy tale? I'm your host, Debbi Sleuth, and I'm here to guide you through the labyrinth of achievement with heart and soul. Ready to dare to declare? Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this beautiful episode of the Dare to Declare podcast. Today, I have an amazing guest, Francine Apy, and she is an adoption coach. She's an author, speaker, and founder of Soul Filling, a platform dedicated to inspiring conversations and sharing uplifting and balanced stories of adoption. As a mother to 3 adopted sons and an aunt to 5 nieces who are also adopted, Francine understands firsthand the importance of creating open, ongoing conversations about adoption, providing families with comfort, confidence, connection, and open communication. With over 25 years of experience in HR leadership, coaching, professional development, and training, Francine brings a wealth of expertise to her advocacy work. She holds a BA from Le Moyne College, completed the Coaching Certification Intensive through the Coaching and Positive Psychology Institute, and has further refined her voice through the Right Speak Coach Masterclass. Her work blends storytelling with deep commitment to empowering individuals and families touched by adoption and beyond. Francine's debut children's book, Brianna's Brave Day at School, introduces young readers to the power of sharing your story and understanding when faced with questions about adoption. Welcome, Francine.
Thank you so much. So great to be here.
Well, I'm really excited. And when we had a call, quite a while ago already, I couldn't wait. I was just like jumping out of my seat to say, I'm adopted. And I'm now able to talk about this. And I just love your mission and just was so enthusiastic and excited to talk with you. And then, of course, I wanted to invite you here on the podcast because your mission, and why don't you just say it in your own words, what is your mission around adoption?
Well, first and foremost, I hope you take this the right way, Debbi, but to hear such positive impact from you as an adoptee, as a mom yourself, just means the world to me, right? So I have my 3 sons through the blessing of adoption. I have 5 nieces and nephews through the blessing of adoption. I have dear friends and friends who have adopted their children and chosen to grow their family through adoption. But to hear from the adoptee like yourself directly that you appreciate my mission means the world to me. So I just want to say thank you for that. And really, at the end of the day, my mission is to bring to light the adoption conversation in a balanced, mainstream, casual kind of way. Life is serious. Having children is serious, whether you adopted your children or not. But every conversation doesn't need to be serious. And I think the more we can bring in the topic of adoption, as I like to refer to as that one extra lens, that we who are touched by adoption, whether you're a birth mom, an adoptee, an adoptive mom, we do have an extra lens to look through our lives, but it's one of many lenses. And so I just would like to invite that perspective more to the broader community to help make the conversation more casual and mainstream, and quite honestly, just more comfortable, right? I think sometimes often, there's over 5 million adoptees in the US. Okay. We don't know that exact number. There's probably way more than that, but we know based on the statistics that there's at least 5 million. And when you take that number, it multiplies exponentially when you think about the number of people those individuals touch, from birth family to adoptive family to coaches to doctors to professors, and the list goes on and on. So I feel in 2025, we need to do a better job at educating not just those touched by adoption, but across the board, so that we have a better understanding that, in all honesty, we are more alike than not. If you have adoption in your story, we are more alike. You're still going to go through the growing pains. You're still going to go through the awkward teenage years. You're still going to go through all the things developmentally. You're still going to sometimes like your sibling and sometimes not like your sibling. You're going to sometimes like your mom. You're going to sometimes not like your mom. And the list kind of goes on. And I just truly believe that at the core, that if we look at our lives through that lens, that we're more alike than different, that understanding and respecting that we do have one more lens. And I'll never deny that extra lens. And that lens sometimes takes center stage, that lens of adoption. But it doesn't always have to be center stage. It doesn't always have to be about adoption. It can just be there, right? In the background. And let something else take center stage, how the person is excelling in a job, how they're excelling in the arts, how they're, it's just who they are as a person, and they happen to have adoption in their story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very long answer. It's a very long answer, but I get passionate because I just feel that there's so much that we could do when we kind of look at the adoption story that way.
For sure. I think as a society, and I'm sure it's the same in the United States as it is in Canada, but there is a bit of an obsession with when a baby's born, and maybe I'm just more sensitive to this, but it's like, who does the baby look like? And that used to grate me when I was little, because I was like, I don't know who I look like. Like, that was something that I was really curious about. But I do realize that that is something that comes through. It's one of the first things people ask when a baby is like, who do they look like? And they already are imagining, oh, they're just going to be just like Uncle so-and-so, or look, grandpa's, are they going to be throwing around a football just like so-and-so? And so much of it has to do with like people attribute it to genetics, for, nature versus nurture kind of thing. And I know you and I have had a conversation also around media and how movies and TV shows have had a negative story around adoption. And you brought that to my attention. I was like, I hadn't really thought about it. It was one of those things that kind of, I would think that I would have been more sensitive to it, but it slid past me on the radar. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, when you think about Lifetime, TV, the network, Lifetime, is that what it's called, Lifetime? Or you think about, different movies that sometimes that incorporate adoption, or even like the show Annie, or children's shows when adoption's incorporated, it's usually around trauma, something bad happened, there's a big challenge, there's difficulty, and yes, that happens in life, and it happens in adoption stories as well. But for whatever reason, media in television and movies tend to lean on either the trauma and the difficulty, and maybe, the birth mother changing their mind, in this couple that was all excited to adopt, now their dream has ended, or the adoptee who, is having such a difficult time, and it must be because, they have adoption in their story. Or it's the other spectrum of everything is perfect and everything is beautiful, and this was such meant to be, and everything is, perfect. And I just believe there's this whole middle section of the human experience that is in the middle that sometimes that we miss. And I feel that with talking about it in ways like we're talking today, and me writing, this book that I'm working on, The Places Our Feet Have Taken Us, that highlight adoption stories on all sides of the triad, of just balanced, real life stories that have adoption in them, right? They don't have to be incredibly perfect, exactly perfect. And they don't have to be, so traumatic that the person can't live a full life. Like, I do live with my glasses is half full and it's overflowing. But I do believe in my heart that regardless of what happens to us, what we're exposed to, we do have a choice to choose to live your life to the fullest extent possible, with joy, with resilience, with peace, with acceptance, even with the unanswered questions. And not to say that that's easy, and not to say you don't have to do some hard work. And as I say, build your team and bring your team in, because 100%, we can't do these things on our own. But nobody was brought into this world as like a life sentence that I'm meant to live this terrible life, regardless of the topic. It could be adoption. It could be, something else related that happened that the person had nothing to do with, right? It was a situation that they were placed in. And so I just don't think media and television, and certainly the news, we tend to gravitate towards the trauma, right? And that's what sells the movie or the story. And adoption, has been at the mercy, I think, sometimes. And, the history of adoption, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, doesn't help the adoption story from why some of these stigmas and some of these conversations have evolved the way that they've had, because quite honestly, it's a very imperfect history that I think today is working really hard in the right direction. Is it perfect? No. Is there any process, system, government, healthcare, country perfect? Doesn't exist. But I do think adoption has evolved and has grown for the better, more so than not. And I want to help a media in publications and books and periodicals and news blurbs and podcasts to begin to bring to the forefront those stories that, yes, I have adoption in my story. And yes, you know what? Quite honestly, I don't like some of the chapters of it. And yes, I struggled with this area and I didn't like that very much. But today I'm here to say I've worked through those things and I'm still dedicated to living a full, beautiful, vibrant life.
Mm-hmm. One of the things when you said it was my positive outlook around my adoption, but I attribute that to my parents. And so when my parents treated me as though I was fully theirs, and not only my parents, but my grandparents, both sets of grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins. And it wasn't like, I would say we were little sweethearts, but it wasn't where they're handling us with kid gloves either. And I think you and I talked about that as well, where, and you alluded to that, where if adoption is the only lens, then you could, I've seen this where families as well, if the child came, that they came through a different situation, that they're almost wanting to befriend the child versus parent the child. And so my parents definitely parented us. We received discipline, and just like my friends did, and like any other child did. And I think that in terms of love as though we were theirs was so healthy, and that it wasn't like, it wasn't where it's on one side where I felt like, that I was being handled with kid gloves, but also that I didn't feel this idea that I needed to be grateful to my parents for adopting me. I think that's another thing that sometimes I see as well, where it's like, well, you should be grateful. Well, I didn't choose, and children don't choose to be adopted, like especially in like any child. Like this is not where this is a situation, but to imagine if you had to live this sense of feeling gratitude for what is a basic right, which is love and belonging. And like, we all deserve that. And so I think those are the two extremes. I just want to put this white elephant out there to say, that's kind of where it can really go awry. And I feel like my parents did a really good job of that. What do you think about that?
That's awesome. That's awesome. I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want it to come out the wrong way. But when we were raising our children, our kids are now 23, 20, and 18. So we're getting closer to they're all young adults. But we too, I think, like your parents, that because you have adoption in your story and that because you may be having a hard time, not even related to adoption, we will never use that as an excuse for you to not show up as your best self, to make good decisions for yourself, right? To choose respect. It's building those healthy boundaries that I think, quite honestly, are so much harder to build than just letting kids kind of run all over you, right? And control the show. So it's harder to parent. I told my kids all the time, if I didn't love you this much, honestly, it's so much easier just to kind of be like, oh, it's just a stage, No, we're going to dig in here. Okay. I want you to be your best version of yourself. That's it.
Yep.
As long as you lead with respect, right? For our family, for those you interface with, and you do it in a way that, is within the boundaries and the rules of our home. But if you're frustrated, even whether it's adoption related or not, we're not going to allow, right, this inappropriate behavior to kind of take over. And I'm sorry if you're having a difficult time, but we all have difficult times sometimes, right? But we still need to be respectful and accountable to each other. So I really respect that you recognize that from your parents of trying to do that. And I'm sure as a mom yourself, you've experienced that of like really needing to be like, someday I'm going to be their friend and I would love to be their best friend someday, but today's not the day. And today's the day to say, you're having a hard time and I will help you find the help that you need to get through this if you're really stuck. But this is the expectation, this is the expectation. So yeah, those are harder days. But I think if we don't have those harder discussions sooner rather than later, as you know, it just grows and grows and grows. And you become, you're not really doing your role as a parent, right? You're not giving them, I tell my kids, you were brought into the world because you needed guidance. Of course, you can't do it on your own as an infant, as a baby, as a toddler. You're there to be cared for, to be guided. And so, are we perfect all the time? Of course not. We do the best we can. Do we sometimes have to apologize? Of course. But at the end of the day, they need the guidance. And if I do feel I owe that to them, of giving that parental guidance, even when it was more work than being like, pretending, just ignore it, that it's going to go away.
Right. Every parent. I mean, that's again what children deserve, is they deserve to know, feel safe, to have a sense of belonging, to be loved. Yeah. So I find it really interesting that before you were a children's author, I think this is before, that you wrote a book for your mom.
Yes. So I didn't write mom's book. So I brought it to life. So I self-published it and created the cover and the epilogue and the forward. But a good friend of mine, so my mom was born in Ukraine. She has a fascinating story. 5 years old, war struck in Ukraine, hit by shrapnel, um, lived in foster care from when she was 5 until 12 years old, of coming to this country with her sister. And it's an amazing story, right? And so our whole lives, we wanted to write mom's story, and publish it. But we never caught to it. Whenever we needed an A in a paper, whether it was history, philosophy, religion, just write mom's story. And it always weaved in somehow, beautifully. So then I met this woman who is a local professor, who is a professor of Ukrainian and Russian history. And I said, oh my goodness, would you be willing to write mom's story? Because she was able to truly paint the historical background and really give the maps and the facts of what was going on in Ukraine when my mom was a little girl and experiencing all this trauma. And so she did. And long story short, we did it in 2016. And I, went to Kinko's and I made 50 copies. And we had a surprise party for my mom and kind of checked the box. Yay, we wrote mom's book. And then, of course, tragically, everything happened in Ukraine in more recent years. And I went back to my friend and I said, I think this book deserves a couple more chapters to bring the world of Ukraine up from 2016 to 2020. My mom, she's 86 now, lived through COVID. She did lose her sister during COVID. And we're at some chapters, and I think there's an opportunity to publish this with the hopes that it provides hope for the Ukrainian people, but also can teach our children that history is repeating itself, and that my mom is probably one of the most positive, optimistic people I know. And if there's anybody in the world who should be angry, bitter, never, ever, 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 because she instilled in herself this mindset that I have a choice. I didn't choose where I was born. I didn't choose to be hit by shrapnel. I didn't choose. But at the end of the day, she has a life to live. And she woke up every day and led that and has led that with the most optimism of anyone. So I worked with a book coach, and they helped me put it all together and helped me understand the self-publishing world. And we had some time left over after that project because I didn't actually write the whole story. So we didn't need the full 6 months that I was working with this book coach. And they said, was there ever a book you wanted to write? And I said, well, my mission is to help make the conversation of adoption more mainstream at home, work, and school. And I'd love to write a children's book. And I'd love an adoption themed children's book to be in every library, bookstore, so that, again, as a way that we see adoption in a mainstream way in a book. And so the book is Brianna's Brave Day at School.
For both of you who are watching, I'm holding it up right now.
Yeah, there she is. There's Brianna. So it is actually based on an actual event that happened to one of our sons, who's now 20 years old. Pardon me?
Can you please share that?
Oh, sure. So it happened to one of our sons when he was in first grade. He's now 20. And people have asked, why Brianna? And I said, well, I have 3 sons, and Brianna would have been one of my girls' names. And I didn't have a girl, so I'm channeling my girl energy through my children's book. And quite honestly, it was as innocent as they came into the classroom and all the kids got to grab a book off the shelf and read for a few minutes before the school day started. And then afterwards, the teacher opened up for discussion on if anyone wanted to share what they read about. And this little girl in this classroom put her hand up, and she just very innocently said, my book was about a little boy who was adopted. He must have been a very bad baby for his mom to not want him. And my middle son, Matthew, and from the second our children were born, we were very fortunate. My son's birth mothers were amazing and allowed me in the delivery room. I cut the cord for all 3 of my children. My birth mothers all held their children. And I wanted them to know adoption was a beautiful word, that birth mother is a beautiful word, that they came to our family through adoption. And so they felt very comfortable, age appropriately, of what the word adoption meant. And that word always developed, right, as they got older, of course. So long story short, he's the shyest of my 3, but his hand went up and he said, actually, I was adopted. And my birth mother was only 15 years old. And she was too young to take care of me. And she was so excited that my mom and dad were ready to be a mom and dad. And he went on to further say, did you know that thousands and thousands of people want to adopt a child? So she had a big decision to make. And that was an important decision for her. So you could kind of hear a pin drop, the teacher said. And they just broke out into a whole conversation of how families come together. And Matthew, you were so brave for speaking up. And, the little girl innocently, of course, apologized. And then other kids, guess what? Others had adoption in their story. They had relatives who were adopted, who were neighbors were adopted. So it just turned into this, yeah, that's what it means to be adopted. And the fact that he spoke up and shared that. And so that's the gist of the story. But then at the end of the book, I wanted to make it a little bit more educational for the child. It's kind of for ages 4 to 10. But then at the end, I also wanted to be educational for the parent who was reading it, or maybe the sitter to read it. And, to know that the lotus flower is the adoption flower, that November's National Adoption Month, that, over 5 million adoptees in the US, and that's twice the size of Mississippi. Like what the adoption symbol is, which is Brianna's lucky charm that she wears, and begin to build this language around making it more comfortable to talk about adoption in a casual way. That yes, it is a serious matter. And yes, a woman had to make a really, really serious decision about another life. And that child, that person had no influence on that. These decisions were made for them. And we have to accept and honor the decisions that were made in the best interest of ourselves. And we are then asked to live our lives to the fullest that we can. And so that, needless to say, was a very proud moment for my little 8-year-old, because I got the little, I went for pickup that day, and the teacher's flagging me over, and she said, I need to share with you. And she broke down in tears. She said the confidence that he has in his story, and how he wanted people to understand what adoption means was so important to him. And every little face in that classroom just wanted to hear, oh, that's what it means, and that's our friend Matthew. And we really like Matthew. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not foreign. He's not a bad kid. He's a good kid. And so, it's kind of was a shocker's statement for me to put in a children's book. And I hope that kids get through the rest of the story, because it shows her resilience, and it shows the strength it can take just to speak up, and as I'll often talk about in book readings, take out the word adoption and put in whatever word you want.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Whatever's hard for you to bring up. You have a challenge with reading, or you are having a difficult time, not being shy, or maybe you have divorce in your story, whatever it is. But the minute you start bringing that topic up in a safe environment, it makes you stronger, and it educates the people around you. And it's very powerful.
Listening to you speak, my grandfather was a minister in the Reformed Church, very conservative, wore black all the time. And in Dutch, they say dominee. So it was a dominee, a reverend. And I remember with joy listening, like as a little girl, because he would talk about adoption and also connect it off the pulpit. We went to church twice on Sundays, but how the Bible also speaks about adoption, like that we are adopted sons and daughters of the King. Right. Like adoption is part of the biblical story, and how we are redeemed, but we are adopted. And so that's actually very biblical language. I just was at listening to a sermon of my own church, and I want to make sure I have the facts straight, but this is the gist of it. Was he was saying that in the Roman culture, also talking about adoption, that children that were adopted actually had a higher status than even biological children within the family. And there was a law that they could never be returned. Like it was like they almost.
I remember reading about that, to be honest with you, when I started to dig into some of the history of the word. Yeah.
And I had never heard this before. And I thought, well, then that is why the biblical reference to adoption also makes so much more sense, that it's like it is intentional action, and that it is so much love, and that it is permanent, and it raises the status even within the family. And I thought just in the biblical sense as well. So just as you're speaking, I'm remembering these things from my past and my church upbringing.
That's beautiful. And me as being a strong person of faith as well, has grounded me, and I think grounded our family so much, and the church family, right? That we are adopted sons and daughters, to your point. And when you think of like a father's love, like God's love for us all through adoption, it is a beautiful, those times when adoption has been used in church, and gives us that opportunity to talk about adoption in that way. Like, think about how much God loves you and the Blessed Mother loves you, that extends through us and through our family. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful way to work in the word adoption, which we did as often as we could, just to always leave that door open to let them know this is something that is good to talk about, and that, it's okay. It's wonderful to talk about.
Mm. And so I see you're wearing your charm. Can you talk a bit about your charm? And you mentioned it that Brianna.
Sure.
That too.
So the triangle and the heart is the unofficial untold adoption symbol. And I don't know what makes the symbol official, but so the triangle is the three sides that bring a family together: birth family, adoptive family, child, and then the heart is brought together by love. So the Dave Thomas Foundation uses this symbol a lot. The gentleman, the founder of Wendy's. So you'll see it's black and red, and that I've always seen throughout the years. And to me, it just is a little rigid looking. It's lovely, and the symmetry is there. So anyway, I commissioned a local jeweler to make my heart a little imperfect, because love doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful, to make it just a little bit more whimsical. And I am a true believer in therapy. I'm a true believer in, having a life coach. I'm a true believer in having faith and building your team. So I did not want to close my heart. My heart just kind of continues on to leave that open, that on your journey, whether you have adoption in your story or not, be open to opportunity for change, to build your team, to change out your team, to know that it's not just because I love you so much, you're going to have a wonderful life. Love is amazing, and love is the core, right? But we all do need sometimes other people in our lives, other professionals, or other perspectives to help us be our best selves. And so I wanted that heart to signify the uniqueness of imperfection, but also the openness of bringing in help when you need it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's really powerful. So some of the things you've already been using, some of the language around, and not saying things like real mother, but saying birth mother. Are there any other little tips you can give to the listener around how to be sensitive, but also knowledgeable around making this mainstream, but also making it real, but also being respectful of the adoption process?
Yeah, I think, and I get this question sometimes, and I think the biggest thing for me is when somebody chooses to share that they have adoption in their story. Personally, I think the best thing to say is, I'm really curious about that. Is that something you'd like to tell me more about today or some other time? Just something as simple as that. I mean, a lot of times, and again, it's not any of anyone's fault while I was raising my children, but a lot of people didn't know that that we adopted our children, because they tend to just resemble my husband and I. And I always wanted my kids to know that when they're ready, they can share, their story and yada, yada. But I always was surprised when it came up, like I would say, oh yeah, my son, we actually, adopted our children. And they would say, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Like it's nothing to be sorry about. Again, it's that natural instinct to apologize, I guess, maybe because they're a little embarrassed or they're not sure what to say, or so for me, I'd like to replace that with, that's really beautiful. I'm really curious to learn more about your story, if that's something, that you'd like to share with me sometime. And so just to be curious about someone's story, and to try, I just wrote a blog about this recently, to try to not jump like right in and think that just because you know somebody who is adopted, then all adoption stories are the same. No two of us have the same story, right? Whether you have adoption in your story or not. And so give that person the grace and the opportunity to know that their story may be very different. Their adoption story may be very different from the one that you know. It may be more challenging. It may be easier. It may be whatever. So just not making the assumption that because they have adoption in their story, it must be like what you saw on the news or what you read in a magazine or whatever. Give them that opportunity to own and have their own story, because there are no two alike. So simple things of like, be curious. And then the other big one is, you know, no, my children's birth mother did not give up their children. They chose an adoption plan. And recently I heard too, which I think is a beautiful way to, share is they decided, they couldn't parent their child. And that's really what it comes down to. I mean, parenting is a lifelong journey and experience, right? And when you think about beyond that initial baby being born, and that they do need a lot, but they're going to need more and more and more. They chose that they could not parent their child,
Right.
and they chose somebody else to parent, and it's the most selfless act I think there is, and to acknowledge that. So the real parent, I laugh sometimes when sometimes people still will slip and say that, and I'll say I'm very real as the adoptive mom. I'm very real. And the birth mom is very real as well.
Yeah.
Our experiences are very different, but we're both very real, right?
Yes.
So we have a biological, we have a birth mom, and then we have the mom, that is parenting the child.
Yeah. And it's just ignorance, or people just not understanding and not, and so always being able to help people better understand, and those that you're speaking to, if they are curious, they're like, oh, I didn't know. Yeah, that makes so much sense. That makes, when I first connected with my birth mother, one of the very first things I put in the letter was thank you. And when you said selfless, that is absolutely how I feel as well. And when I love that you have the heart with all three of them, because it is an act of love. And that's how I see this, as an expression of love to, and selflessness, as you said, to have a plan where you are then not able to parent, and seeing that and providing that opportunity for other parents who so desperately want to have a baby. So I love that. And one other thing you said, my dad and I have this little thing that he's very well known in our church. He's also a minister. And when now as an adult, and even as a teenager, we would have this little thing that if someone would come up and say, oh yeah, like I can tell because they know my dad, but then they'd see me and they're like, oh yeah, I could tell she's your daughter for sure. She looks just like you. Like people say that, like they're obsessed with that, right?
Yeah.
And then my dad and I, he'd wink at me.
Yeah.
And I didn't correct people. And it was just our little thing. And it was just like, that's okay. We don't need to correct people. We don't need to make this anything. Like, it was just a fun little thing that he would just wink at me and be like, yep, she's mine, And so, I hadn't thought about that in a while. So
that's really sweet.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up here, you have your charm, you have your mom's book, you had your book. Where can people get a hold of you, and also your beautiful resources that you have?
Sure.
Where can I purchase them?
Sure. So my website is soulfillingadoption.com, which it lists all the projects and things that I'm working on. I'm currently offering right now a Mother's Day reset for after Mother's Day, the 3 Tuesdays after Mother's Day. But I am definitely getting more involved with workshops and webinars where I can engage with different people within the community, whether they're touched by adoption or not, just from an educational and an informational standpoint. But soulfillingadoption.com can get you up to date on all the different things that I'm working on. I have a great newsletter that I put out just twice a month that really highlights different stories and the things that I'm working on. And then, of course, my book, Brianna's Brave Day, and my mom's book, Dominica's Story, A Life of Courage, Hope, and Love, are both on Amazon as well.
Yeah, for the listener, and please pass along this episode if you know someone else who could benefit from Francine coming and speaking for your group. And she and I were talking like, it would be awesome, even as a duo, for her as the adoptive mom and for me to be an adoptee, and sharing our perspectives around the adoption story. And as she said earlier, her main goal is to make this a mainstream conversation that's positive, and that just normalizes it. So yeah, I mean, if there's anyone that you yourself or know that would want to bring in Francine to share her amazing resources and workshops, please connect with her. So is there any final words for listener that you'd like to leave?
I would love to just say one more thing if I could. So one of the things I struggled a little bit while raising my children is I am a true believer in therapy and bringing, identifying, people to help you through difficult times. And a lot of times I would lead with finding a therapist when we moved first for myself or for our family members before we had an issue. Luckily we didn't have to use it very much at all, but I wanted to know I had that resource in my back pocket. And it never ceases to amaze me while raising my kids out of the last 23 years that there were not adoption competent therapists. I found, like, through my reading and research and work that I've done, it never ceased to amaze me that there weren't adoption competent therapists and knowing so many people that I knew about adoption. So I just want to share that has evolved so dramatically as well. In the Center for Adoption Support and Education out of Maryland, they actually wrote the curriculum that they teach therapists. They're in 33 different states right now out of the 50 states in the US, but they teach therapists to how to become adoption competent therapists. So if somebody walks in their office and a person has adoption in their story, they are better prepared of how to look through that lens, right? And provide services to those individuals. So I never want to underestimate or oversimplify that adoption can be complicated. A lot of different things can come up on your journey that may be adoption related. I'm very quick to not just say, oh, it must be because they're adopted. I'm going to do some research because nature versus nurture is about 50-50%. And sometimes it's 60-40, 60, nurture, 40 nature. So I just wanted to share that the resources are there today for when we do get stuck. Nobody has to stay stuck. I'm a true believer. If you have a drive to want to improve and feel better and move through this life with more ease, the resources are available. And I think the Center for Adoption Support and Education out of Maryland does a beautiful job at helping therapists help those in the adoption community.
Is that the acronym CASE?
Yes.
Okay. And the proceeds from your mom's book also goes to that, right?
100%.
Yes. So excellent. And so we can drop that link as well in the show notes for that center as well. And so how are you tied to that center?
So the only thing I am an LLC. And so any kind of fundraising that I do, they are non-for-profit. I direct to their organization specifically that provides funding for families who need their services, who need financial assistance. So, like, for example, my son has a dress down day tomorrow at his school, and they have to pay $5 to dress down. Last year, we raised over $2,000. I hope to do that again. That $2,000 check is sent to CASE and specifically to help fund, those who need the services, who need some financial support. So if I do any other events, community events, those sorts of things that you collect a donation, those donations directly go to that organization. Now, because I believe in that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Is CASE a national, like across the United States, or just in your state?
So they're based out of Maryland and Virginia are their headquarters, but they do predominantly their training online. So they have trained therapists in 33 states in the US. So out of the 50 states, they do have trained therapists in New York State. I know where I am. But they have therapists, and they offer all kinds of online courses. I'll actually be teaching a course in November with them. But they don't charge for those courses for family members they're like master classes, right? And raising your family and things like that, informational sessions, on a variety of topics. So, but they're training certified, which they wrote the curriculum is in 33 of the 50 states.
Amazing. You were up to big things, and I'm so glad our paths have crossed. And this has just been delightful. Any final words?
Gosh, I just thank you again for helping me on my mission to bring the conversation to the forefront. And I would love any feedback from your listeners on things that they think I can do to help bring that conversation forward. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And I hope we, leave this message with knowing a little bit more about adoption and how it has evolved and how we can best, keep moving forward.
Thank you so much for being here. And to my listener, don't forget, dare to declare. Today, we've delved into the realm of manifesting giants, exploring the power of declaring our desires to the universe with unapologetic boldness. But before we bid adieu, I have a little something special to share with all of you dreamers out there. Introducing the Dare to Declare Vision Board magazine and online DIY Vision Board course, your ticket to manifesting greatness in style. Picture this, flipping through pages filled with inspiring images, empowering quotes, and step-by-step guides to help you create the vision board of your dreams. Whether you're yearning for that spacious condo with a view, or a love that sets your soul on fire, our magazine is here to guide you every step of the way. Dive deep into the art of manifesting with our exclusive online DIY vision board course. Led by manifesting expert, yes, yours truly, and seasoned dreamers. This course will teach you the ins and outs of creating a vision board that speaks to your heart and soul. So what are you waiting for? Join the ranks of the manifesting giants and dare to declare your wildest dreams to the universe. Head over to our website, debbysluice.com, and grab your copy of the Dare to Declare Vision Board magazine and enroll in our online DIY Vision Board course today. Until next time, keep dreaming big and daring to declare, because in the world of manifesting, the sky's the limit.